Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the sixth installment of Debut Revue, a new online reading series dedicated to promoting and celebrating poets whose full-length debuts have been disrupted by the pandemic. I'll briefly introduce myself first. My name is Jian Yoon, one of the co-founders and also a debut poet with the University of Nebraska Press.
And I'm the other co-founder. My name is Emma Hine, and I'm also a debut poet with Sarah Band Books. Today, our incredible featured readers are Destiny O. Birdsong, Torrin A. Greathouse, Lucas Hall, and Taylor Johnson. Our readers will each read for 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll have a brief conversational Q&A before wrapping up. And if you like what you hear, please consider purchasing these authors' books via their publishers, an independent bookstore, or our bookshop affiliate page, all of which will be linked below.
We are super grateful to everyone tuning in, and we cannot wait to get started. But before we do, we wanted to send our thoughts to everyone who are either themselves or have loved ones impacted by the severe weather and resulting infrastructure failures this past week in Texas. We have linked below a few resources and mutual aids for those affected by the winter storm and its fallout. And if you're able to, please do consider donating or sending your support. So without further ado, we're going to jump right into the readings. We have 4 incredible readers to introduce to you today. And it is my honor to start off this reading by introducing our first incredible reader, Destiny O. Birdsong. Let me draw a big breath for this, this incredible bio. Destiny O. Birdsong is a Louisiana-born poet, essayist, and fiction writer who lives in Nashville, Tennessee. Her work has either appeared or is forthcoming in the Paris Review, Catapult, the Breakbeat Poets Presents Black Girl Magic, and elsewhere. Destiny has won the Academy of American Poets Prize, Naugatuck River Review's 2016 Poetry Contest, Meridian's 2017 Borders Contest in Poetry, and the Richard G. Peterson Poetry Prize from Crab Orchard Review. She has received support from Kapekanem, Callaloo, Jack Jones Literary Arts, Pink Door, McDowell, the Ragdale Foundation, and Tin House, where she was a 2018 Summer Workshop Scholar. Her debut poetry collection, Negotiations, was published by Tin House Books in October, and her debut novel, Dream Girls, is forthcoming from Grand Central in 2022. About Negotiations, Donica Kelly says, Birdsong's negotiations endgame is not simply survival. It aims to flourish. The Zoom stage is all yours, Destiny.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having me. It's always kind of exciting, but also nerve-wracking to be asked to read, and then you see the rest of the lineup. And when I saw this one, I was like, oh crap, these people are amazing. So it feels really good to be in such wonderful company. And I'm going to read a few poems from Negotiations. A couple of them are poems that I don't often read, but this feels like such a special space that I thought I would give it a go. So the first poem is called Failed Avoidance of the Body in a Poem. Your therapist wants to know where in your body you most feel your anxiety. You tell her it's in the bones behind your face. They have their own music, like Ptolemy's universe, and chirp like shuriken dancing in the road. Your therapist says you hurt because there are things you've never been taught to do. How to hold yourself in sleep, how to drive, how to live with men. Back when you were 5, or maybe 4, your father knelt before you for the last time, close enough that you could smell him, a zephyr of Cool's Filter Kings, and leaving. He pushed the tricycle toward you, purple and white streamers, limp as hair on the handlebars. By the time you mounted the cranium-shaped seat, he was gone. Your new goal is to learn to breathe through bones, to make flutes of them, although in reality, you are much more supple, a crooked fold of flesh that comes so quickly when called. You are the warm-bellied animal on the shoulder, coated in sunscreen and your father's curiosity, white-haired possum with his green, green eyes. You're now the oldest you may ever be. You have never before been this afraid. There are no bullets bound to rush into the room when yours becomes a bullet ringing the tiles. You know all about love's austere and lonely offices, checking your stools for blood, checking your breasts for lumps, checking your neck for swelling nodes, checking the locks, the coffee pot, and all the cracked eyes blinking wrath on the kitchen stove. Your own weep against a pillowcase you haven't washed, stiff with the miasma of your hair. You stare at pictures of the girlfriend grinning in sunlight. You feel bad for not being taken with yourself more, but your body is all asymptotes and fractals. Your own skin splinters in the dark from its dense heat. The pieces come back together under a halo of prescriptions steeping your head in yellow light. Sometimes, while combing your hair, a sliver of cartilage lodges in your finger pad. You swallow the glittering blood and spit out the shard. Compared to your father, this is not unkind. Somewhere between your skull and the skin that swaddles it, all the songs you didn't know you needed to learn from him crescendo and fade to the rhythm of your breathing. This next poem is called Spilled Milk, and it's dedicated to Hotep. He joked that I was the whitest thing he ever put in his mouth, but a king forgets the taste of his mother's milk before anything else. He came to me in the mornings, after shifts of sitting with the psychopaths, waking them up, feeding them fistfuls of meds, honey buns and blunts for himself during the breaks, eyes glossed as if in a prophetic trance. I am the Bambara proverb for what could happen to children conceived in daylight. So I draw the drapes, he'd drop his khakis, and we'd make ourselves dark. He did this to show me he wasn't afraid, like when he refused to blink after one of the intakes threatened to kill him if he ever dozed off. Then there was me, stumbling down the hall of men with fathers. He studied the great hymn of the Aten with his, described how their fingers skimmed the verses as his ankh skirted my collarbone and he entered me the way the father entered debates over the exact location of the Garden of Eden. Let's just lay out the facts, he would say. The son and I, we fucked, and later, because I stopped believing in his household gods, each of my stomach's valves blistered shut. Now he tells me my diseases don't really exist. They're just European fetishes, like pasteurization. Such a shame we can't drink each other anymore. And it was fun, getting pissy on the balcony. But whenever I'd whisper, I need into a pillow, he'd stuff the fingers with which he cleaned grown men into my mouth. Shut up. We do this for fun. Can I ever be 19 again? With all these years and babies wedged between us, including the ones I made up. He's toasting the groom in our most recent photos, his teeth as relentless as Okonkwo's, filed and gleaming. I'm on the dance floor, scrambling for the bouquet. He sidesteps the sailing garter, each wingtip a man's polished back facing east. You don't know what it's like to fall in love with a woman who isn't. He'd drift without finishing, and I'd fade to black, like the engineer his father was too stupid to marry. Sometimes an animal asks for its own death with the sound of a single branch breaking. I've since learned all the ways he intended to spill me, then forget my breasts too, those white elephants wandering in a room of African violets, a rabble of monarchs rusting their trunks. Still, I may always want to know where he's headed, heart cloaked like a dagger, the whole race in one pocket, and one of my tusks bloodying the other. And I always like to end in joy, but there are only like 2 joyful poems in this collection. So I feel like I'm always reading this poem at the end of every reading, but I love it. So I'll read it again. It's called Ode to My Penis. Pill crusher, needle flusher, coconut oiler of legs, and the untouched space beneath breasts, butcher, baker, bathwater maker. And when 10,000 fall at my side and the phone goes dry, you are my hitching post of God's great grace. Bottle shaker, chalice faker, everything that ever poisoned us passed through, so too have the cures. You raised me from the dead, sinister digits. And if there's a right way to stroke raw honey from the lioness's mouth, you stumble, but find it every time. Palm grazing her grizzle, how the swarm quiets for a moment. The pupilled areolas dilate their vein-webbed fronds. Oh girl, who else rides me safely through Jerusalem, unsaddled on her simple back, or massages my slippery feet with her whorled hair? I'll never let your tunic drag the ground of want again. We'll have each other and live like Lazarus, unraveling his spool in the sister's stunned silence, the death oils slipping from his skin. Savior, you track mirrored light into my wilderness, a little spit, a little mud. At the first touch, I saw men as monstrous as marching trees. Then, after a second touch, just trees. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Destiny. That was such a gift. Thank you. And so now it's my honor to welcome our second reader, Torrin A. Greathouse. Torrin is a transgendered cripple punk and MFA candidate at the University of Minnesota. She has received fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Effing Foundation for Sex Positivity, Zoe Glacia, and the University of Arizona Poetry Center. Their work is published in Poetry, Plowshares, New England Review, and the Kenyon Review. Her debut poetry collection, Wound from the Mouth of a Wound, was the winner of the 2020 Ballard Spar Prize for Poetry, selected by Amy Nizuka-Matatiel. Of this book, Nizuka-Matatiel says, "In these pages, the fragments and fusion of public and private desire dig into exhilarating terrain I didn't quite realize I had been thirsty for all along." We're so excited to have Torrin and these poems with us today. Welcome.
Thank y'all so much for having me. I'm pretty shy, so I'm just gonna get straight into the poems. Ode to the first time I wore a dress and my mother did not flinch. My palm still recalls the shape, crushed velvet, soft, jagged pull that makes my thin jaw ring, my teeth a row of tiny bells. How it stained my skin silhouette the color of a newborn, bruised before first puberty. It made mayhem of my skin, unbraided jeans to watch their blueprint spill, moth's unfinished body from split cocoon. In my mouth, boyhood was a fawn, stomach lined with nettle blooms, a dog retching grass, bright red of a silver necklace torn from my throat by a boy who bit small moons from his fingernails and told me all the ways he could break my body. No one would even notice. He left my mouth dry as velvet scrubbed from a buck's bone crown rouge across a tree's pale face, and I loved him for it. Wanted him to love me back like anything other than a boy, window, perfect pebble, shooting star, penknife, painted pair of lips. My mother helped me tighten the straps, lent me her smallest heels, and watched me dance with a violent boy's gentle name on my tongue. I can't imagine how both of them will see this velvet slip as nothing more than tender skin, to be shed bloody from a boy, to make from them a man. That's so lame, he says, when the bus is late, when the TV show is canceled, when a fascist is elected, when the Wi-Fi's bad. That's so lame, I say, rubbernecking my body in the bathroom mirror. See, every time lame comes out a mouth it doesn't belong in, my cane hand itches. My bum knee cracks, my tongue's limp gets worse some days. It's so bedridden in the bottom of my jaw, it can't stand up for itself, fumbles a fuck you, trips over its own etymology when all I want to ask is, why do you keep dragging my body into this when I want to ask, did you know how this slur feathered its way into language? By way of lame duck whose own wings sever it from the flock and make it perfect prey. I want to ask, how long have you been naming us by our dead? Baby booked your broken from the textbooks of our anatomy. A car limped along the freeway, a child crippled by their mother's baleful stare. Before I could accept this body's fractures, I had to unlearn lame as the first breath of lament. I'm still learning not to let a stranger speak me into a funeral. An elegy in Orthodox slang. My dad used to tell me this old riddle. What value is there in a horse that cannot gallop? A bullet, and whatever a butcher can make of it. Burning high bun. Once, my mother accused me of throwing alcohol and gasoline on my emotion. Once, my father's breath was a guilty verdict. His car curved inward like a palm, how it birthed him back as a fist, and I became the bloody rise of crescent moons hidden inside. I skinned my knuckles and smell the alcohol before it enters the wound. Yesterday, I read that cleaning a cut with this clear burn will worsen the scar, make the undamaged cells forget how to rebuild. Maybe each scar is the skin's blackout, each blackout erasure down to the cell. Once, my father tried to collision a child into perfect. Once, I tried to drink myself into blackout or erasure myself into something more poem than memory. Since the birth of words, we have language, our history into burnable things, papyrus, paper, plastic film. Once I bought a box of cassettes just to watch their innards burn. Flashpoint from wound to wound. Once I bought a box of cassettes just to watch their innards burn, flashpoint from wound to wound. Once the cops accused me of my lineage, my blood a guilty verdict. Each breath, my father's, how we first called delirium tremens, the blue devils, alcohol, possessing the body, how each drink curls me into a tighter fist. And this too is not mine, or if I claim innocence, each bruised wall, each jaundiced dawn without a midnight before it becomes a guilty verdict. My mother marries an alcoholic and gives birth to kindling. This is to say, my father calls his child a faggot and watches them burn. That I inherit this addiction from my father, or the queer of my blood. Once I swallowed liquor like guilt and named this family. Once my mother accused me of my father's breath, his fist hidden inside. I smelled the alcohol. Forget how to rebuild each blackout, erasure down to birth of burnable things. Once I just watched the wound accuse me of my blood, my father's, possessing the body, how each drink too is not mine. Or I claim guilt. My mother gives birth to his child, a faggot. And I inherit this queer of my blood. I swallow and name family. Father, hidden in erasure of me, each drink, mine, my faggot blood. I just have one more. Abecedarian, requiring further examination before a diagnosis can be determined. After Natalie Diaz. Antonym for me, a medical book. Replace all the punctuation, commas, semicolons, periods with question marks. Diagnosis is just apotheosis with sharper edges, new name for a myth already lived in. For the sake of thoroughness, I have given until my veins cratered tests administered for HIV, cirrhosis, glucose, cancer, creatine, albumin, iron, platelets. I've slept for days, wired to machines, had my piss filtered for stray proteins, just to be safe still inside my body, kingdom with poisoned wells. I want anything but an elegy lining my bones. I just want to be a question this body can answer. My new doctor writes one referral, then another still. No guesses. A man in a scowl and lab coat offers yoga. More painkillers suggest PTSD could be the cause of chronic pain. My limp of migraines, quickened pulse and blood glittered coughs of seizures rattling me inside my skin. Oh, syndrome of my perfect and unbroken transgender arm. They checked my hormones too. Yes, unfathomable. A suffering I did not choose must be gender. This vacancy my body makes of its own flesh, how I vanish from myself. We search for a beginning to this story and find only a history of breakage X-rays cannot explain. Some girls are not made, but spring from the dirt, yearling tree already scarred from its branches, severance, zygote of red clay that rain washes into a river of blood. Thank you so much.
Wow. Torrin, that was incredible. I'm so glad that I had myself on mute because I was just like oohing and awing all over the place. And I like to make notes of lines that I love during readings, and I like filled up my little my little pad of paper. That was incredible. Thank you so much for those poems. And I now feel so fortunate to get to introduce our third reader, Lucas Ray Hall. Lucas Ray Hall holds an MFA from Pacific University. They are the author of Loudest When Startled, which was published by Yes Yes Books in 2020. About Loudest When Startled, Eduardo Corral says, in these poems, Hall set their hurt next to their brother's hurt. This book is beautifully crafted, emotionally rich. I wept when I finished reading it. To be completely honest, so did I. Their poems have appeared in the Florida Review, Moon City Review, Atlanta Review, among others. They live in St. Paul, Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming Lucas.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having me, June and Emma. It's so tough always to go in the middle because I feel like you're going after such great readings and then you don't get to just run away at the end. So this is my book, Loudest When Startled. Love the cover, but I just love showing it off because I love that cover so much, even though I have nothing to do with it. My first poem is called Hunting Accident. For all these poems, I just want to do a content warning of gun violence and suicide. So here's the first poem, Hunting Accident. One day, my brother asked me to go hunting with him. Stood in my bedroom doorway, my body between him and the furrows of light between the swaying window shades. I watched the gun over his shoulder sway as he shifted his footing, waiting like a bullet splintering its target. I told him no, though I wished to tell him yes, if only to be mistaken for the splash of white tail when he pulls the trigger. This next poem is called Protection. When it came my turn, my brother stood shoulder to my elbow with me, bruise to bruise. The stock of his rifle jutted to his side, the moist rubber of my rifle's grip against my palm. A crowd of family members had massed around us. He glanced down at me, his neck muscles ribboning, then tapped the muffs, cupping my ears. I took them off. The crisp orange fall converged on my skin. He said, I understand if you don't want to. I looked around, eyes riveted on my throat, swallowing, my nervous lip, its twitch, left hand now fidgeting in my coat pocket, bottom to top. He examined my sheltered, my alien, my foolish body. This next poem is called Brother, I Think More About Your Rifles. Than I do you. Their sweet steel and finish, their polymer bodies, cool lips, their gentle push on my shoulder after firing. Brother, your rifles are always there for you, to protect your elder door, to scare off your daughter's fling, to greet a deer's warm fur, all locked up, nuzzled in their plastic brackets, the key hidden in the closet, in a shoebox. I know, brother, I swear, I contemplate those rifles, if they could be there for me, lonesome, on my pull-out bed, sifting the bustle of my mind, fixated on the trigger's center lever, which locks until it is fully depressed. This next poem is a shorter poem. and one of the duets that got written for this. It's called Rye Grass. My brother presses his cheek to the field, rye grass threading his dirty hair, breathes in the sunrise sky, gun smoke and ragweed, a scaffolding holding his lungs in place. And then I just have a couple more. Obviously, I picked all brother poems. That's pretty much the whole collection is just about my brother. This one is towards the end and is entitled Over Dinner. We go out to dinner, my brother and me. He arrives as he does, freshly swabbed, impeccable rifles slung over his shoulder. He sets it against the table, the resting O pointed upwards at the jittered hands of the waiter. We order, we talk about the weather, the accumulation of snow on the sidewalk, how our socks are soaked, how we both may need new boots after this winter. I tell him a story about work, my manager, his deceased fern that he is in denial about. We laugh. I see the gentle creaks of his face when he smiles. I had never thought of him getting older. He accidentally combs his hair with his salad fork. We laugh more. The rifle, its barrel, pressed against the fringe of the tablecloth, sits there, muzzled and shy, saying nothing. And my last poem is entitled How a Bullet Works. Just thank you again. This has been awesome. How a Bullet Works. You savor it. The familiar scent on your tongue like a pinch of ginger or raw aged venison. Savor it like the smudge on the lens after you peel away after the shot, like the pleasant split of wood. It's splintering, the sawdust blooming, a clap of a million tiny particles, the sting, the piercing, its overwhelming shock. You find it in the femur, mushroomed, spent, bore it out, savor it like a short summer affair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Those last couple of poems almost made me cry on video. And thank you, Torrin, before Lucas as well. And again, to Destiny. Each debut review kind of has a different feeling, and this one is so kind of gorgeous and meditative. And I find myself just wanting to sit in these poems for as long as I can. So I'm so glad and honored to introduce our fourth and final reader, Taylor Johnson. Taylor Johnson is from Washington, D.C. They are the author of the debut poetry collection Inheritance, which was published by Alice James Books in 2020. And their work appears in the Paris Review, the Baffler, Scalawag, and elsewhere. Johnson is a Cave Canem Graduate Fellow and a recipient of the 2017 Larry Neal Writers Award from the D.C. Commission on the Arts and Humanities. They live in New Orleans. Of Inheritance, Harmony Holiday says, "This is a world in tune with its own private, overheard magic, at the risk of losing everything that might impede it, which is what we must risk to hear and transcribe true poetry." Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Taylor.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, this is like a formidable crew to be in, so thank you. Since I quit that internet service, I'm thinking more about the transitive properties in books, the words, the palimpsest of images accruing in my brain, but more immediately the book in my hand, the cover worn at one end from sweat and gripping it when it comes close. Close as in when I stood up, let one deep exhale when I came to the lines of all fearless happiness from which reaches my life I sing and find it underlined by a beloved stranger. It's like turning the record over, knowing you're hearing what I'm hearing, easing up on the edge of the chair. It's like we're holding hands now at the edge of a white silence from which we are to make a music of our being here, of being moved, wherein our music complements and holds close each other's sound. Sound in the wet room of the tree I met you in. Nothing is said about the water or the fearless trees angled toward and against the light. Light that did fall on me, made much of me, light that sings through me. So I'm singing Nocturne. What was rampant in me was not wisteria, perhaps decay or loss of reflection. No one like me gets old, or so I thought, even as I watched the days fade into each other. Was I no one? Which phrase means a grown up girl, mica gilded, pure myth, gone. The row might say I was trying to find the door to nothingness, that the wild was already in me. However, I walked out my bed to find my skin only to return moon drunk, bramble laden, stripped to sinew, a broken syntax. No denying how I got here. I lay down among the tall grass and came up a specter. I came up everywhere. Ecclesiastes, how to testify. In the marketplace, for my voice was everything, was meaningless. Knee deep in the mud with my tongue out. Monsoon, mason jar, morning glory. Must I carry even the idiolect of gravel, glossolalia, and stupor of all things, moving and unmoving? I fall in and fall back out. Oh, exaltation. The Virginia pine grows straight up to deeper blue, and most tap roots I'll never see. I was waiting for you to turn around, pretending none of this baffles me, not taking it personally. Bolaño blued. The forest is bordered by the highway to the west and the railroad tracks to the east. Here, like a dead man, I never sleep. I'm the moon, soon the sea darkening an apology. My sickness is antithetical, my accomplice or attempt, pride, rage, violence. For a long time, I wondered what English meant, if it was worth its weight in enlightenment, everything slow and asthmatic, everything disgustingly still, frozen somewhere in the air. Maybe that's why I can't express want I what, two words strung together. Maybe that's why I lived alone and did nothing for 3 years. Loneliness is an aspect of human authorization, verbal egotism. I write to understand stillness, not to praise. To name is to please, to keep awake. All pleas to the highway, swells, bursts. I'm going to show a film now. I'm going to show a film now. Yesterday, to keep awake, I dreamed I lived inside the agitation of silence. A hollow building in Barcelona, the abandoned Mediterranean blue, a tree turning the lights on and off. Occasionally it shook, the monkey applauding in the corner, fade to black. Everything gleams like the wind in the rocks. The sad stories I must tell you, the gesture that never came, the trigger pulled at the worst possible moment. Audience, go-go ode. Oh, capacious room, give me your tongues. I'm done with being self-possessed. Take hold, turn the river in me. I'm freed up to be anybody else. My molecules twinned with the sound. Oh, erotic hours pass me not. Keep me in the pocket. Oh, percussive descent, devotion is anything you say go awry. In this early hour, keep me recursive. The impulse is to lose my feet. I'm yet overcome. You seismic drop, you sovereign fade. Oh, black chaos, I'm in study at your center. Turn me out. Art movie. Red is a secret in the trees. The train passes through the trees in Alabama. Red earth, red earth. The winter light consumes the field. The light silvers, the light relieves, the light thrown as dust upon the field. I put my ear in. I crack an egg, and a saxophone that tells on me, yells at me, comes out. No yoke. The train hollers to stop. The train stops, still loads new passengers, but the conductor won't let me get off and kiss you. You know, that's what I haunted to do. The stage is the window circle between us, the emergency exit door. I keep you in my ear and give you how I'm doing and what I want to eat were I not on a train. You and your white boots. You tell me what else could come out of an egg. Women all the way down, holding waists. The train is a place going by, strictly passing through. I touch a stranger's wrist going back to my seat. The whole train becomes a garment I put on. I touch indiscriminately. I can't stay, I tell the dog, waving from your convertible. None of the windows open. I held your gaze until I couldn't. In the previous scene, I took you to the slip until we were shining tunnels for sound. I took your sound from my name, never asked what I called myself. I forget about money watching the clouds over 8th and Ingraham. The clouds, a rhubarb colored ship in the sky. To my right, it all grays out. The bats emerging now from the chimneys. The bats listening for the cicada's echo. Echo is a way to create space, is a metaphor for time. Time for the cop to move along. I think watching the cop watch me from my porch. Fuck 12, the robin on the wire vine, the wire eye competing with the bats for cicadas, the robin competing reds with the sky a money for the cicadas, a way to make space, time. The cicadas sounding out the future through repetition. A friend says to spend nothing is to keep flexibility in your hands, to keep your youth. Money, the sound of decay. Money, the repetition of waste. The Black proletarianization of the bourgeois form isn't Kanye West gospel samples. Oh, death, your singular eye. My mother speaks the king's English, makes quiche, makes clove pomanders in winter, pawned her flute, cleaned my elementary school classroom. What is hers? Brilliant song, my mother sotto voce in her chair, asking for touch. It is drowning she means, not freedom. I swam fine, don't you get it? Oh, death, my mother is elegant, alive, entering the blue hole of evening alone. You could reach into the frame, pull her out. Oh, death, I've been crueler, I've watched. I'll just read one more. Thank you so much for having me. A kind of wildness descends, and across the expanse, the attendant wind drones its one fecund song. When I'm so tender in the thick of rot, I let all the morning wet spread a plague across this threadbare vessel that holds in what hums, what rushes beneath. Give as the ground gives. Make of me your groveling tongue, your dust, your possessed, possessing, never let up. Thank you.
Wow, that was so beautiful. That was magical. There's like a line that I feel like I'm going to be thinking about all night, which is, I wrote it in the chat, light that sings through me, so I'm singing. That's just like, it's going to be playing and repeating in my mind. So thank you so much for that reading. And thank you everybody, to all of our readers. I mean, that was just like such a spellbounding um, blend of voices. And before we end, we have just a few questions, mostly about like debuting and formulating your first books. So for the first question, I'm always kind of interested in knowing more about a book's lineage. So if you were to kind of like map out your book's conception, which books or media or like voices have left thumbprints on your collections?
I can start if that's okay.
Of course.
A book that I loved and read a lot when I was working on this book was Christopher Gilbert's first book, or his only book while he was alive, called Across the Mutual Landscape. That's just a brilliant book, and I connected with it a lot. And some of it is, some of the music is definitely with me as I was writing, some of the poems here. Yeah.
It's called Across the Mutual Landscape.
Across the Mutual Landscape. Yeah.
I love that. I can totally hear that.
He's a brilliant poet, He's a really brilliant poet. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for my collection, one that I kept going back to was Matt Rasmussen's Black Aperture, which is a collection about his brother's suicide. So a lot of that, it obviously spoke a lot to the content of mine and kind of drawing those parallels. And that's just one that kept coming back for me.
And he ended up being one of the blurbers for your book too.
Yes, yeah. I was determined to ask him, so yeah, luckily he said yes.
I'll go next. So there are a ton of references that found their ways into the poems. There's music from SZA and like Johnny Gill, and my epigraphs are from Terrence Hayes and TJ Jarrett, whose book Ain't No Grave, I think is really one of my favorite books. And but I've been thinking about this too, and I don't know that if it was it wasn't a thing I was thinking about as I was writing, but it's a thing that I think about now that the book is done. I think one of the most transformative texts for me, reading in high school and then again in college and then again in grad school, was Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. I feel like there's just everything in that book. There's, the economics of slavery / capitalism / the West. And there's, there is a narrative about sexual violence, and there's a narrative about how labor is stolen and how that impacts one's, dreams. She ends the book by saying, I'm free, but I don't have a home for my children. And like, it makes me think about my own aspirations and the kinds of homes I want to create for myself and the people I love. And so I think that the book was unwittingly in conversation with that book. So.
I think there's probably 3 books for me that I kind of kept cycling through as I sort of lost and found the ability to write as I worked on this book. Jennifer Espinoza's There Should Be Flowers, Ocean Vuong's Night Sky with Exit Wounds, and Gillian Weiss's The Amputee's Guide to Sex. All 3 of those books were really fundamental to me in my poetics in this collection.
I love that. Thank you all for speaking to that question. I feel like there's, I don't know, a few things more fun than hearing about what books poets I admire. So thank you. Another question, if you wouldn't mind answering. I was wondering how your debut book has sort of changed over the period that you spent writing it. Like how would you have described the book that you thought you were writing when you started really working on this book, and what realizations or what additions turned it into the final published version?
So I can speak to this a little bit in terms of like physical changes. So when the book was picked up, it had like 3 very large sections, and in the process of editing it, it expanded to about 6. And then in the expansion, I ended up writing 2 poems that became part of a longer sequence in the middle of the book. And those poems are about sexual violence and race and all kinds of things, and class. And I didn't know I was writing a book that would include those things. There's a moment, so I was working on 2 manuscripts when I was working on this book, and there was a moment when I realized that the section that would ultimately include that sequence was supposed to be in the book, because like most of those poems were in the other one, and I was like devastated. And I wasn't quite sure why, but I think, you know, in hindsight, it's because I think perhaps subconsciously I knew I was going to have to write those poems, and I didn't know that I was ready, but I somehow got ready, and it was a really, for me, those are some of the most important poems in the book. I mean, I think all of them are important because I put them in, but I guess if I would have described the book then, that it was about, you know, I would have told you the book was about love when I was working on it. And I think it still is, but I think that, you know, the book has kind of expanded my idea of what love is. And so it's become this larger conversation also about, you know, love and race, love and violence, you know, love and, you know, chronic illness, love and my body. And I didn't know that all the ands would come into play when I was working on it, but it's been a journey and it's been a good one.
I love that. Thank you. Oh, sorry, Tori, go ahead.
I think the big thing for me was the whole collection. All of the ideas and the themes were there, but it was a complete mess because there was no sort of organizing principle or kind of guiding force to it until I wrote the opening poem, Medusa with the Head of Perseus, which also then includes the line that became the title of the collection. Before then, it had a placeholder title that was absolutely terrible. And I was still submitting it, and I submitted it for several years because of this anxiety about publishing and just like getting my work out there while I'm here. But until I wrote that poem, the collection couldn't really fundamentally exist. And then that poem contained everything I needed to connect all the other threads. And by putting it as almost a foreword to the rest of the book, I was able to make sense of everything else I'd been writing.
I'll respond to that. When I was writing these poems that became the book, I wasn't thinking about writing a book. I didn't have that kind of sense in mind. I was just writing poems and responding to, you know, the things that I was reading and things that I was seeing and feeling. So when like all these poems came together to make this thing, I wanted the sense to be as kinetic as I was when I was working on these poems individually. And I think maybe similar to what you just said, Torrin, the first poem, when I wrote it, I understood that it was, you know, this thing that kind of introduced the voice and maybe like the ideal voice for the whole thing. And maybe just like some kind of invocation or like a intent to call in other people, and for them to participate in the, you know, the movement of the poems as they are, just because I know that like my process was not individualized, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't just me. And I wanted the book to kind of resonate on that level as well.
Yeah, I guess for me, the original like collection was very negative and judgmental. Like it was very much a commentary on, you know, gun violence in America and all these other things. And I realized that wasn't, you know, through conversations, I realized that really wasn't what I was trying to get at. And that's how it kind of started to become more about this like family relationship between the me character and then the brother. So I think it kind of went from entirely dark, like negative point of view throughout the entire thing to this kind of discussion and like meditation on, you know, gun violence in terms of this like family, like brother relationship instead of like as a country as a whole. So I guess it kind of went from very macro to a more micro thing and made it more personal.
Thank you so much, everybody, for sharing that. I feel like I learned so much from all of you, and it's always so interesting to hear about where everyone's books kind of like rooted from. And I guess for the last question, this is the question that we like to always end off on, is we like to open the space a little bit wider for other writers and other people who are coming into the same space. So if you can shout out one recent poetry debut or a book that is forthcoming, we would love to hear who you would like to shout out.
I will shout out Lisa Sumney's Say It Hurts from Yes Yes Books. It just came out like a few days after inauguration, so I feel like it's been, and you know, tons of stuff happening. It's a fantastic queer collection. Yes, that one.
I want to mention Wild Peach by my friend Sean D. Henry Smith. That's an excellent book. Came out with Future Poem a little while ago. Beautiful book.
I will shout out Danica Kelly's The Renunciations, which is coming out in May. I had the privilege of reading it last year, and it is brutal but exquisite, and really excited about its being in the world.
I am trying to desperately narrow down because I had like a whole list of them written because there's so many incredible debuts. If I have to shout out just one, just recently dropped Sam Rush's Swallow from Sibling Rivalry Press. It's an absolutely incredible collection by a deaf trans poet, and does some of the coolest things I've fucking ever seen someone do with sonnets, like reinvigorated my relationship to sonnets as like an object of craft. Just really, really fantastic book. I had the privilege of getting to edit before it came out, and I really recommend checking out. It's fantastic.
Swallow. If you want to shout out a few more, because I know you had a list, you're totally welcome to.
Yeah, we realize that this is an impossible task. We just like to end kind of with a community note, but we're not trying to gatekeep in any way.
Jubila Hedley's Original Kink, also from Sibling Rivalry Press. Incredible debut collection. I was totally blown away by it. George Abraham's Birthright from Button Poetry. Just like a massive book for a debut, but like just jam-packed with incredible poems and really innovating on form in so many cool ways. Coming out in September of this year, Ariel Marie's Gumbo Yaya is going to be so fucking incredible. Yeah, just so many debuts I'm excited for.
So many. I feel like every month or every couple of months when we sit down to look ahead for Debut Revue, we end up sitting here on Zoom just talking about how many incredible books are coming out and how lucky we feel to be able to read them and celebrate them. So thank you again to all four of you so much. It's been such a pleasure and an honor to get to celebrate you and your work. tonight. For everyone watching, we do hope that you'll consider buying their books and spreading the word about their books and our reading series on social media. And please, again, prioritize buying a book and donating to the mutual aid causes that we've linked to below. We have a donate link on our website, but this month we just wanted to ask everyone to, again, keep prioritizing buying books and putting money, if we have it, where it's needed right now. And thank you again so much to our readers. You all are amazing.
And you could stay tuned to our Twitter for announcements about next month's reading. Next month's reading is now every other month. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider purchasing or requesting our readers' books at your local library, or dropping a review on Goodreads for all of our readers, of course. And thank you, everyone. One final round of applause for Destiny, Torrin, Lucas, and Taylor. Thank you all so much. Good night.
Awesome.